Welcome to the new Cyber Frontier, bringing you the latest news on the local Colorado economy and initiatives that focus on the development of cybersecurity economics. You don't have to be a computer or cybersecurity expert to get plugged in. Your host, Chris Gorog, brings it straightforward, asks the tough questions, and brings the cyber world to a level of understanding for everyone. Chris is personable and opens up with our guests on issues we all would like to see addressed. You can find us on the web at www.newcyberfrontier.com. Now join our host as he introduces the topic for today's new Cyber Frontier.
So welcome today. We are going to talk a little bit about identity theft. And we have a guest on who, at first we were talking about not releasing his name, but he said we're okay there. But we have Wallace Pond, who has been, is wallacekpond.com. He has been the CEO of several higher education companies, including Career Education Corporation, which is Colorado Technical University's parent company.
Yeah, and I was actually president and CEO of the Colorado Technical University system, not Career Education Corporation. And also I've been the president and CEO of University of St. Augustine for health sciences. I also ran a company in the Caribbean. Spent 3 years in Paradise, overseeing, bringing together actually 4 different college systems, 3 in the Caribbean and 1 in Florida, under one administrative roof. That was a really fun gig for 3 years. I've also been with Laureate Education that was the corporate parent for University of St. Augustine. I started, Chris, 28 years ago as a school teacher and an adjunct professor. So I have been one way or another in the education world for pretty much my entire professional life. I had some jobs previous to that, but they wouldn't qualify as professional. So for about 28 years, one way or another, I've been doing things in education. And my website, wallacekpond.com, is a source of information for both education and leadership and management. But the thing we're talking about today,
yes,
actually, I'm one of the many, many millions of unlucky victims of identity theft. The last time we got together and we're chatting, we agreed that this might be helpful for your audience in terms of the podcast, talking about sort of my experience and what people can learn from that. Mm-hmm. My identity's already been stolen.
So we're going into your experience, identity theft. And what we have here is a case of spear phishing, where they're going after someone that is well circulated, that they can get information on. And tell us about how it all started.
We'll be right back with the rest of today's show right after these brief messages from our sponsors. Cyber Resilience Institute helps build strong cyber communities designed to prevent members from attack. Like building a neighborhood watch, it takes coordination and a sharing community to protect our identities and valuables in the virtual world. Typically, we hear that organizations know they need to do something to protect their cyber assets, but don't know where to begin. Let Cyber Resilience Institute help your community create an action plan. Cyber Resilience Institute will build your community or business marketplace so that it is designed to support a collective cyber defense. Contact them for more information at cyberresilienceinstitute.org.
And what we have here is a case of spear phishing, where they're going after someone that is well circulated, that they can get information on. And tell us about how it all started.
Yeah, so I pay for a service that I highly recommend, which, by the way, does not protect you from identity theft, but it gives you a warning if something is happening. And that is a monthly service that monitors your credit bureau reports and sends you a notification anytime that there's been an application for credit in your name. And it could have been something you did, which it typically is, or it could be something that someone else is doing in your name, and that's the warning.
But you have to be active with that. If you
Absolutely.
learn to be 100% active with this.
Yes, you have to pay for this. You can get it through credit card companies. You can get it through banks. You can get it through the credit bureaus themselves. Mm-hmm. They also sell the service. But you have to pay for it on a monthly basis. It's quite reasonable. It can be anywhere from $10, $12, $15 a month. And I say reasonable considering the downside if you don't know something has happened for weeks or months.
So let's talk about the downside.
Right.
Let's talk about how it started, what we found out. And
so interesting. So I got an email on a Wednesday. This was back in January. A notification via email from the company through which I pay for this service that said, oh, by the way, there's been an application for credit made in your name. I think, I don't recall which of the 3 bureaus, but has been, and they monitor all 3. And that's critical. You want to monitor all 3 bureaus. And it threw me off at first because I actually do have a card with that company, a credit card. So I wasn't as initially suspicious because I thought maybe the company was issuing me or wanted to issue me a different kind of credit card. They were updating their files. Typically, they wouldn't do what's called a hard inquiry, but I was initially a little bit, I didn't take it as seriously as I should have because I recognized the company. Nonetheless, I did quickly, within probably 24 hours, reach out to the company that manages or that monitors my report to get more information on the actual credit request. When I did that, I then knew that something fishy was going on because I discovered it was an actual application for a completely new credit card connected to an airline that I didn't want and had not asked for. That turned out to be a $50,000 credit line that was approved by the bank, and the credit card was sent out, and I'll come back to that in a second. And even though I was clued into this within 24 hours and contacted the issuing company within probably 2.5 days, the credit card had already been issued and was already being sent by that time. And the reason that happened was because of how thorough the identity theft was and what these folks were able to do.
So what information did they have?
So we know for sure that they had date of birth, social security number, physical address, home phone number, and they also, and I'll speak to this later, apparently had related family information as well. So this was the mother lode of identity theft. They had it all. They also had information like my frequent flyer number for one of the airlines, which is why they made application for credit for a frequent flyer card in particular, not just any credit card. And so they were able to impersonate me from every conceivable angle. They had all the information that they could possibly need to triangulate and suggest to people that they were actually me when they weren't. I don't know for sure where the hack came from. It could have been a combination of sources. The related family income is or related family information typically is with health insurance. It's not connected to a bank or to a utility company. So the law enforcement that I spoke to think that the hack probably involved at least partly medical insurance. And there have been several significant data hacks in the last probably 1.5 years of very large health insurance companies. So this is the quick kind of timeline. 8th of January, I received an email with the credit application in my name. On the 9th, I reached out to the company that had notified me. On the 11th, I determined for sure that the application was fraudulent. I notified the issuing credit card company. They had already issued the card at that point, and were not able to stop that, but they were able to begin the process of potentially stopping, or not stopping, but closing the account, so they could protect themselves as well. Now here's where it also gets really interesting and creepy and and frightening. This identity theft was so sophisticated that they also, starting on the 8th of January, reached out to both UPS and FedEx, and they opened accounts in my name so they could control shipments.
Wow.
Including diverting shipments to any address of their choosing, right? So they could track, and not just criminal shipments, but my own legitimate stuff coming to my house. I did not know they had done that because because neither FedEx nor UPS, they notify you by snail mail. It took 10 days to get a postcard from both of those companies so that I knew that these criminals were also impersonating me with UPS and FedEx. On the 10th of January, the criminals stole my home phone number.
Now, how does that work?
And when I say they stole my home phone number, I don't mean they just spoofed it on a caller ID. I mean they called the phone company impersonating me and stole the number and ported it to another phone company. So what happened was I woke up one morning and I had no dial tone in my house. It was just gone. There was no phone service. It took me 3 days working with the phone company to even get them to tell me that my phone service no longer existed and had been ported to another phone company. They finally acknowledged that they were trying to get me to work with repairman and reset modems. And I was telling them, I don't think that's the problem. I think the phone service is gone because I couldn't call my voicemail externally, nothing. It was all gone. So with that, as you can imagine how complicated this gets, they can now not only call anybody and not just spoof, but actually call from my phone number, and anyone calling my phone number to confirm anything rings at the criminal's location as me. And you can imagine what goes through your mind and what it feels like when this is happening to you. It's terrifying. And you are so powerless.
So they can prove that they're you and you can't.
Exactly, because what happened is once they stole my phone number, I was able to call the new phone company, for example, and tell the story. But the criminals had put a password that I didn't know on the service.
So you couldn't even get them to talk to you.
Exactly. Initially. I called him back a second time, and this is where this whole notion of identity theft gets kind of creepy, because what I learned and what was explained to me by law enforcement, both local and federal, is that when it gets to this level, and I'm told that the things that happen to me are rare. In other words, I got the full Monty. Most people aren't hit by this much sophistication. Mm-hmm. But what I was told was when it gets to this case, the problem is that I actually have less rights than the criminals, because then all these privacy policies come into play at the companies.
So they have privacy protection.
Exactly. And so even if they believe I'm the victim, they won't tell me anything, right? I'm talking the phone company, the credit card company, FedEx, UPS. And the criminals now have every single piece of information that I have to prove that I'm me. And once you get to that point, and that's when you start freaking out, because you're thinking, gee, what the hell's the end game here? I mean, what do I know that they don't know that someone will ask for that will allow me to prove that I'm me?
So all these virtual environments, nobody's ever seen anybody face to face.
Right.
And you're trying to prove you're you when they have more proof that somebody else is you.
Exactly. And what happened with the phone number, and at this point, I didn't actually want the phone number back because it was tainted. In other words, I didn't know what criminal activities had already been perpetrated using my phone number. But I wanted it back because I didn't want them to have it. You know, I wanted, my whole rationale was to stop them from being able to continue to use the phone number in their criminal activity. The second time I called the second phone number, there's a second phone company, I actually had to pretend to be the thieves. And I had to say I'd forgotten my password already. I was so sorry. I felt so stupid. I just put the password on the account. And I felt really awful. But I had to do it to get my phone number back.
We'll be right back with the rest of today's show right after these brief messages from our sponsors. Cyber Resilience Institute helps build strong cyber communities designed to prevent members from attack. Like building a neighborhood watch, it takes coordination and a sharing community to protect our identities and valuables in the virtual world. Typically, we hear that organizations know they need to do something to protect their cyber assets, but don't know where to begin. Let Cyber Resilience Institute help your community create an action plan. Cyber Resilience Institute will build your community or business marketplace so that it is designed to support a collective cyber defense. Contact them for more information at cyberresilienceinstitute.org.
I actually had to pretend to be the thieves. And I had to say I'd forgotten my password already. I was so sorry. I felt so stupid. I just put the password on the account. And I felt really awful. But I had to do it to get my phone number back. And,
wow.
and law enforcement would not help me.
That's an interesting thing. Talk about who you called in law enforcement and what was told to you.
So I called the local police department here where we live. And I was told by the company that was the company that was helping me with this identity theft. I was told I need to contact local law enforcement, not because they will do anything, but because having the police report is going to be critical down the line with dealing with all kinds of things, everything from the credit card company to the IRS, right? Because that's your documentation that this actually happened. So I did reach out to the local police department. I spent probably 3 hours working with an officer on the phone over 3 different occasions.
Did you have to go like in person?
I did not. It was all done on the phone.
So virtual
I know.
again.
Oh, I know. Well, and I'll tell you, I'll digress just for a second, Chris. As I was working on all this stuff, trying to fix all of this, whether it was the phone company, the credit card company, the bank, the insurance, the utilities,
all those were affected.
Well, I didn't know. Some were and some weren't, okay? But when I would call these companies up, and even the ones where I knew that I'd been victimized, UPS or the phone company or the credit card company, and I knew I had been victimized, I would have these Twilight Zone conversations with these people on the other end where, we'd go through this whole protocol for identity theft, and they'd say, last 4 of your social. And I'd give it to them, and I'd say, you realize the criminals have this too. This just sounds silly to me because you're asking me to prove that I'm me with all the stuff that's already been stolen from me. Doesn't that sound strange to you? I mean, doesn't this whole process seem a little unlikely or implausible in terms of really having any integrity to it? And every time I would say this, people would just be, that's the policy, that's what we do, that's what it is. They were completely clueless about how to actually deal with it. And the police department, clueless in terms of how to enforce it. After my extensive report to them, a few weeks later, I got a letter from them, and all it said was, we've determined that we cannot pursue this. We're putting it in a drawer. We will not be pursuing your case because we do not believe there's any chance of finding anybody.
So did they not believe there's any chance of finding anybody, or do you think it was that they weren't thoroughly convinced that there was a problem because they can't prove that you didn't do this?
No. I'm absolutely sure that they know that the identity theft was real and that I was victimized. Right? Okay. I have no doubt about it. And the reason I believe that is because as I was doing my research, it turns out that the #1 reported crime in America today, bar none, is identity theft. It exceeds every other crime. Burglary, auto theft, breaking and entering. The #1 reported crime today across the country is identity theft. And it's reported about 15 million times a year. It is massive, the scale of it. And the reason I know that the police department sent me the letter saying, we're not going to pursue this, is because I was told earlier in the process that there's a less than 1% chance that anyone ever gets caught. They have no mechanism for actually pursuing and enforcing identity theft as a crime that results in catching people and prosecuting them. They just don't have any. They don't have any mechanism to do it.
So is the reason for that lack of evidence or lack of ability to kind of trace them down to a point where they can?
Well, my understanding is it's a couple things. One, it's total lack of resources. In other words, they are so overwhelmed. All they can do is just take the reports and create a file so that the victim has something to show.
For their insurance.
Exactly. Insurance or the IRS or Social Security Administration or whatever you have to go fix. The second reason is they don't, the law enforcement, broadly speaking, has no idea where the people perpetuating these crimes are. They don't know if it's international. They don't know if it's domestic. They don't have the technology resource, and they're not. When the crime is happening, they are not interfacing with the criminals. So they have no way of tracing any traffic. They don't have IP address. They have nothing. They don't know because it's all after the fact, right? And at the federal level, there is no enforcement. There's no one to report it to. The FBI doesn't take any. It's too big. It's too overwhelming, and they can't pursue it. So the only place you can even report it from a law enforcement perspective is local police departments, and they've become the de facto clearinghouse for identity theft reporting. It is recommended that you report identity theft to the Federal Trade Commission, but that's a database project for the FTC. It's not enforcement. They're simply trying to track
how many times it happens.
How many times does this happen, and when it does happen, what how are people being victimized? What are the sizes of the crimes, etc.
So you're a statistic.
Exactly, totally. On both ends, both local and federal. So anyway, that's what happened initially to me in terms of how I was hit with the identity theft. Clearly these people had thought about it. They had a plan. They went down the line, immediately tried to get credit in my name, immediately took over at FedEx and UPS, immediately stole my phone, all of these things in a row, not only so that they had every angle to continue impersonating me, but I think also to make it difficult to stop them, right? Because once they've done all those things, I mean, think about it. How do I now go to FedEx and tell them, no, that's my package, or hey, that's a stolen package? Once they own the account, you're just some guy blabbering on the phone about, I got screwed here. I got victimized by identity theft. But there's no way there's no protocol that allows you to get the control back, right? And one of the things I discovered in this whole process is not only is there no way for you to get the control back, but it was absolutely shocking to me, Chris, how completely inept every leg of the stool is. Law enforcement completely unable to do anything. The banks, the phone companies, totally overwhelmed. And every person I talked to, they weren't surprised at all. They hear it every day. Every person I talk to, oh yeah, we get 50 calls a day about this, blah, 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 but no solutions. No one has any way to deal with it, any way to stop it, it's almost as if law enforcement has just given up, and on the bank/utility/phone company side, they're willing to just accept this as a cost of doing business. Then
it's kind of like shoplifting.
Something
they build it into the price, and you get a certain amount. As long as it doesn't get over a certain limit, we're insured for that. We cover that.
That's the only conclusion I could draw. Because, in fact, I pursued this. I may not be the average victim. I mean, I talked to vice presidents in charge of fraud, at UPS or at Citibank. And I was shocked when I would talk to these people about how ineffective or non-existent their policies were after the fact for dealing with it. Even simple things like, you would think that after identity theft, that most of these banks and phone companies and utilities, you would think they would all have the simple protocol of requesting another layer of password, right? Put a mark on your file. This person has been victimized. Anytime someone tries to do a transaction in this person's name, ask for the password. I came across two entities that had the process, and neither one of them since has ever asked me for the damn password. Not once. So even the companies that have tried to do this are completely
Not doing
incompetent.
their own policy.
Yes, when it comes to implementing the policy. And so what I did, in this process, as I mentioned, I conducted the monitoring company. I contacted the credit monitoring company. I filed the police report. I filed an FTC report, which does nothing for me, but is part of the database. I contacted my banking, my phone company, and utility companies. And there's also an IRS form that you can submit to the IRS so that they know that you've been victimized by identity theft. You include the police report when you do it digitally. And that gives you some leverage when dealing with the IRS after the fact, not before, but after the fact if someone has filed taxes in your name. The IRS doesn't have a clue either. All they know is that each year, going back to at least 2014, there have been millions of tax returns fraudulently filed. They don't know exactly how many, because they don't know how many were fraudulent, but no one ever came afterwards that was the correct person to say this is wrong, right? They have no idea how many of their own files have been hacked and how many Social Security numbers have been stolen from the IRS. They have no idea. All they know is that at least several million fraudulent tax returns have been filed each year since 2014, because those have turned up as fraudulent when the real taxpayer came afterwards and tried to file their tax return. It's astonishing that even at that level, that just like everyone else involved in this, they also seem to be completely impotent to deal with any of it. In fact, they won't even tell you if someone has filed a tax return in your name. You have to file a tax return after the identity theft, and then if there's already one in your name, then they will tell you, right?
Wow. So did you have a tax return problem?
I don't know yet.
So that's still
Yes.
in 2016. You haven't found out?
From 2015, I don't know.
Okay.
Yes, I paid a tax bill, and in fact, I'm in a situation that is a little bit more challenging in some ways than some folks. I didn't get a refund. I paid money. Okay, and when that happens, they put you at the back of the line. They don't even begin the forensics because there's no PR problem. If someone owes them money, right? So my understanding is it will be, sometime this summer before I find out.
You're still at that point that you're waiting to find out.
Exactly.
And the expectations are that it could.
Well, what my tax accountant said is he would be shocked if taxes had not been filed in my name. He said, with all that happened to me and all the information that those people had, and as, quote, professional, end quote, as these criminals seem to be, he said he'd be shocked if they hadn't filed a tax return, because there's no risk, potential high reward, and it would just seem to be part of the boxes they check off as they go through the identity theft process. So I don't know. I'll find out. Right? It's possible that they didn't file taxes in my name. If they did, there's a whole other process I have to go through with the IRS to rectify that. And then what I'm told is the IRS is one of the only entities out there that does put that extra layer password and actually uses it.
They started just this year as requiring driver's license numbers.
Yeah.
Because they've had such a problem.
Yeah. And apparently what I was told is that if you can prove identity theft with the IRS, and if they then issue you a password that you have to use in order to file taxes or to ask a question or anything, right? That the IRS actually does use the password. I haven't found anybody else yet who does.
Interesting. Now, but you also said there was a local presence to this.
There was, and this was the part, Chris, that was the most unnerving to me and the most disappointing as it related to local law enforcement, right? Going way back to when the first credit card was opened in my name and then shipped to my address, they actually shipped it to my address, my physical address, because if they had chosen another address, that would have been a flag on the application for the credit card, right? Apparently, if you open a new credit card and you ask it to be sent to an address that isn't your home address on the credit report, that's a flag. They sent it to my home address. I told you it took me about 3 days to confirm that this was fraud. Literally the day I confirmed it was a Saturday. That morning, the credit card showed up on my front porch and they came and stole it, whoever they is. So there was a local component here in the city, a human being that drove to my house. Now keep in mind. So
they watched the FedEx,
yes,
found the delivery,
yes,
and showed up at your door.
Yes, exactly. We didn't see this, but it happened, okay? And it would have been on Saturday morning. Now, you know, someone might ask, well, if they had access to your if they created a FedEx account for you, why didn't they just divert the delivery before it ever got to your house and then not have to go steal it and risk, you know, physically being there at your house? Well, it turns out with the bank, they have a policy that the criminals know about, and this is bizarre, right? I don't know if the bank still has the policy. In January they did. They have a policy whereby if you report a card stolen that you've just ordered, right? You order a brand new credit card and you report it stolen in transit or off your porch, they will then ship a new card to a different address and they won't cancel the card for 72 hours because you haven't gotten it yet. The criminals knew this. I only knew this by talking to people at the bank and really beating on them to help me understand.
So then they got it shipped to another address.
In the same city. And I called the police and I said, the bank would not give me the specific address. No, it's privacy. But if you call Citibank right now and ask for this number in their fraud department, they'll give you the address and you can go wait. You can go catch the people in the act.
They're waiting for the shipment to divert.
Yes.
You found that out from the bank. You called law enforcement. And
the police were so busy, they couldn't take my call. I didn't call 911. I called, you know, the dispatch number. They got back to me 3 days later when it was too late. And so the opportunity to actually be the 1 out of 100.
But couldn't they have still found the address?
They could have. My understanding is that, according to the police officer I spoke to, she claimed that she made one phone call to one of the delivery companies, FedEx or UPS, and one call to the bank, and in both cases she could not get through and left a voicemail and they never got back to her. So, but keep in mind, the volume here is so high that from their perspective, you know, I was frankly really disappointed, right? Because there was a imminent risk to my family. You know, there are criminals coming to my home in the commission of this crime. It's not just someone in a boiler room in Uzbekistan, right? It's physically on my porch, at least one time. Now, to give some credit to the police, they did, upon hearing this, you know, they increased some neighborhood patrols and they, you know, agreed to come look at my house once every 24 hours or something like that. I don't know what it was, right?
So it makes you feel warm and fuzzy.
Yeah, exactly, warm and fuzzy. But I can't imagine what would have happened, you know, if my daughter had opened the front door to let the dog out right while some son of a bitch is on the front porch stealing the stolen credit card, right? Then what? I mean, does the person run away? Does the person freak out and strike her? I don't know. So it's not, in my case, it wasn't this pure abstract out there bits and bytes over the internet. At least at the beginning, in my case, there was a human at my home component to it. And in fact, you know, maybe that's kind of a segue to wrap this up and talk about kind of where I am now. We were able to stop the criminals before they used the credit card, that first credit card. And that's really of benefit to the bank, not to me.
But they didn't catch anybody.
No, of course not. No, they caught nobody.
So you were more active,
way more
proactive than most people would be.
I think so.
So other people, they might go away 3 months or so.
Oh, absolutely.
And all the damage is done.
Yeah, well, in fact, if I didn't subscribe to the service that notified me by email, I wouldn't have known until I got my first credit card bill for $50,000, right?
If it even came to you.
Exactly, right. So who knows where it would have gone. But so that we stopped that. My credit report is now protected, and this is really the only thing you can do. It's protected with a fraud alert. It's not legal, it's not binding, it's in the interest of anyone who issues credit, but it's really a gentleman's agreement that if anyone applies for credit in my name, including myself, with any of the 3 credit bureaus, or if I engage or someone engages in any transaction at all, leasing an apartment, anything that pulls a credit report, in theory, the person issuing the credit is supposed to reach out to me at a phone number that only they and I know, not the one that was stolen, and call and say, is this you, right? Again, it's a gentleman's agreement. There's nothing binding. As far as I know, no one has applied for credit in my name since January. So either someone has tried and there's been a fraud alert and they said, never mind, or no one has attempted it since January. But that's really, there are only 2 things you can do. There are only 2 things you can do that actually, in a meaningful way, protect you once this happens to you. The fraud alert at the credit bureaus and a password at the IRS. Once your information is stolen, there's nothing else you can do if it doesn't involve the IRS or credit bureaus. So if someone wanted to impersonate me with my 401k tomorrow and steal all my money and roll it over to an IRA in the British Virgin Islands, there's nothing I can do to stop that. Because they still have every bit of information to prove that they're me, that the organization would ask for, okay? And because it doesn't pull a credit report, there's no fraud alert. So anyone who's been victimized by identity theft, it's forever. It's forever. And you are never again free of potentially being victimized again. And it's not just financial, it's also criminal. People can engage in all kinds of criminal activities in your name, and then theoretically you'd have to prove it wasn't you who rented the car and transported that meth and leased a house to build a meth lab. You would have to prove it wasn't you, right? If it were done in your name, and all of the information corroborated it was you. The UPS and FedEx notifications were disabled, but the criminals could reopen them anytime because there's no mechanism to stop them. The same group or another group could do it all over again a month from now, 2 years from now. And what's astonishing to me is when I have conversations with the powers that be at these places, they know it, they acknowledge it, and they say, we can't do anything about it. And I remember having a conversation with one of the VPs at UPS, and I said, wait a minute. I said, you have a policy that prohibits me from getting information about my shipments for privacy issues, but you have no policy to stop a criminal from opening the account in the first place? And there was this silence on the phone. She said, that's the way it is. So it's just, it can't be this way forever, Chris, because at some point there's going to have to be a tipping point where the cost of this is so high and the damage is so great that law enforcement and companies will have to get better at it. And apparently we haven't hit that tipping point yet.
Well, and I see this all the time. I talk to a lot of people in cybersecurity, and our culture as a whole hasn't reached the tipping point to spend money on the problem.
Right.
It's not a big enough, it's an individual problem.
Yeah.
Until the individual you becomes a big enough number, enough of you,
Right.
or the individual company has a big enough dollar loss, then those individuals worry about it. But it is a socio-technological problem. It's something that has to be solved by a societal change.
And I get the sense that there's not political will around this yet either. And we'll probably hit a tipping point when that happens too. You know, when enough people are beating on their congressmen and senators about it. I mean, as far as I understand, there aren't specific legislative remedies either. In other words, there aren't legislative remedies that require the kinds of things I talked about. It would be very simple, you know, in terms of, you know, second level.
But as soon as you get to those levels, then the criminals might have that next step.
Well, and they could hack the company where your password is and get it. But they'd have to be able to do that, right? So I guess, you know, where I'm at right now, I got my phone back, but I don't know if that's a good thing. And it was, you know, one of the quick sad things about this, we lost all of our voicemail. You know, you wouldn't even think about that. But when they stole the phone, it was wiped out. And we had like 50 saved voicemails from grandparents and cousins and kids and people traveling, calling back home. Not a big deal, just sentimental value. You know, you could go through and listen to people leave a message and it's all gone, you know, because when they stole it, they just disabled it. So anyway, I'm still vulnerable to the kind of financial theft that I mentioned where that wouldn't involve a credit report. I'm still open to medical fraud. I mean, someone could go get surgery in my name and the bill will get sent to me, right? And that's not just financial. That could be dangerous because if someone starts getting medical care in your name, that goes into your medical record. And you could be in a situation a year from now where a doctor makes a wrong decision based upon something that's in your record that wasn't your condition. It was someone else's condition. So the
things we never think of.
Exactly.
Wow.
And I only know this because of the level of research I did about it. Somewhat protected against liability for new credit, and I'm somewhat protected from criminal ID because I won't go into detail about this. But as part of my work with the police department, we spent a significant amount of time engaging in a process that in theory will protect me from criminal liability in the future if someone commits crimes in my name. I won't go into detail about it because I don't want that public, right?
Understand, yeah.
But that was done, and in theory, down the road, if someone does commit heinous crimes in my name, there's in theory a system we can go to that will say it wasn't this guy.
Yeah.
Okay. So anyway, that's the story.
It's amazing how much that I just heard you say over and over again that you were out of control.
Yeah.
And until enough people experience this, that the tipping point comes around, we definitely need a societal change. And I'm a proponent of that, and that's what a lot of this is about. And us getting the message out is, you know, we need literally governments and big entities and people at the privacy level, mass amounts of people, to all get together and kind of fund the societal change.
I think three things have to happen
and work on it. I
think three things have to happen, and this is just from my perspective as a victim of the crime, nothing other than that. One is that the companies out there that get leveraged in your name to commit crime, they have got to take the victim more seriously. Right now,
so they have to be accountable for the problem.
Absolutely, and right now there's zero accountability for all the companies I mentioned. That's the first thing. You know, they have to own this, right, from the company perspective. The second thing that has to happen is law enforcement, you know, they have to get out of this we can't do anything mode, right, where there's no way to enforce this, there's no way to catch people, there's no way to prosecute, because the crime is going to continue, is going to grow if people can do it with impunity. Why wouldn't you? If you can do it from the safety of your laptop, people are going to keep doing it. And then the third is, I think, at the legislative level, at the statutory level, there have to be laws, and there have to be statutes and regulations that address the reality as it is today, not what it was in the 50s or the 70s.
So we need to come up to speed in some modern issues and understand it.
Absolutely. And I think that could help push the other two, the companies and the law enforcement, to be more accountable.
Yeah, and that's a mindset. Well, deep breath.
I know.
Thanks for joining today. I don't even have any advice to give you. You know, as being in the center of this for several years, there's some very motivated people working on it. Mm-hmm. We just need to get culture and society on board.
Right.
And a lot of that is kind of a little bit at the legislative end. So I hope they hear this and take some insight. Thanks, Wallace Pond.
Thank you, Chris. Appreciate it.
Sure. Have a good one.
You too.
We hope you have enjoyed this episode of New Cyber Frontier. Remember to get involved. Often we think that someone else will handle privacy and security in the virtual world, but you are the only one truly in command of your virtual fate. Join our mailing list so we can keep you informed of breaking news and new releases. If you have an idea, if you have a question that you would like to hear answered, or if you want to get involved with our efforts, reach out to us at newcyberfrontier.com. We also encourage you to visit our sponsors' links, as they are the ones that really make this show possible. I want to thank each of you for supporting the show, and we look forward to seeing you back for the next episode of New Cyber Frontier.